Welcome to the Office of Undergraduate Research's Research Profiles. Today, we're doing a research profile with Dr. Christopher Josey to discuss his research with undergraduates in the Arts, Social Sciences, and Humanities, or also known as ASH Scholars Program, as well as his research with undergraduates and the Communication Department. So let's start off with, can you just tell me a little bit about who you are, what you do, who you work with?
Yeah, absolutely. My name is Christopher Josey. I'm in the Department of Communication. I teach several classes that involve student research projects, honors Communication 2100. I enjoy working with undergraduates in research and have been doing so since I got my Ph.D. at the University of Illinois. And my dissertation was all research with undergraduates. So I've been doing this pretty well since I started doing research in general. So I enjoy working with undergraduates, and I'm blessed that the Office of Undergraduate Research, in combination with the Honors College, has provided funding to us to, as you know, for the ASH Scholars Program, which we get to do wonderful research.
And maybe just a little bit about media effects theory and your background with that.
Sure. So my particular research background involves studying the content and effects of news programming of various types on media consumers. In particular, beyond just being a media effects scholar and teacher, one of the things I'm most interested in, kind of the nexus of my research, involves the portrayal of persons of color and other marginalized groups within news and the impacts that that can have on media consumers. My most recent research that you're a part of involves how news organizations that are designed to cater to certain social identity groups, such as the Latinx community and the African American community, impact social well-being for African Americans, because research is extensively documented that whether it's in television, newspaper print, cable news, or online news, that mainstream news organizations such as the New York Times, the Los Angeles Times, Fox News do a poor job representing the diversity within marginalized communities, and more often than not present highly problematic portrayals, such as all Latinx individuals being undocumented immigrants, sometimes using loaded language such as calling them illegal immigrants, or African Americans as welfare queens being one stereotype, or violent criminal perpetrators. So we certainly, in my research, have looked at that, and I have several publications that look at how mainstream news online portrays persons of color in problematic ways. But one of the things we're branching out into now, as you know, is looking at how social identity-focused news, such as The Root, The Griot, Aldea News, those sorts of news organizations can present uplifting or stereotype disconfirming portrayals of persons of color that can serve a multitude of positive sort of impacts for those communities.
Yeah, I also wanted to touch on a little bit of the different methodologies in communications. Mm-hmm. One of the things that to me is so interesting about the research is when you're practicing how to do a method yourself, like it is something that you don't necessarily need other people to start imagining how to do, because you could do a content analysis or being observing different articles and whatnot. Mm. And it's a little different aspect than you would see in a biology lab or something. And can you talk about your experience both teaching undergraduates this, as well as the different types of methodologies that are unique to the communication and social sciences fields?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that I think, since I study news, and since we do research in news, undergraduates, graduate students, et cetera, in both psychology and communication, but media psychologist is kind of what a lot of media comm scholars are, in addition to just being communication scholars. There are a number of ways that we can sort of get at how content and effects sort of impact consumers of it. One of the ways is through content analysis and through experiments. But again, it's not in the traditional lab settings you might see in biology. We're not manipulating things within a lab. We manipulate media treatments, for example, maybe altering the race of a person portrayed in a news story and then asking a participant in the study to recall, for example, what race the person in the story was. And depending on the type of story, they may accurately or inaccurately recall the race of the person in the story. So one of the things that I'm passionate about, one of the main classes that I teach here at Mizzou involves media literacy, Communication 2100. And I know this interview isn't about teaching, but anytime you're doing research, you're teaching. And so for me, one of the things that whether it's publishing it and hopefully somebody reads it and learns from it, so you're teaching the greater public, if your research makes it out of there through advocacy within the classroom. And in my Com 2100 class, one of the things I'm passionate about is helping students become more media literate. In the honors derivation of that, we do original research, content analyses. And the reason for that is there are a lot of popular press articles on this consumption of this media artifact has this impact on individuals. For example, a few years back, there was a study that came out of Mizzou, as a matter of fact, a graduate student from the Department of Communication, that looked at the differential impact of people's consumption in a relationship of Facebook on relational satisfaction. And it found when there were huge gaps between individuals who consumed not so much and people that consumed a lot, there was greater relational discord, right? And so understanding how the sausage is made, as it were, is kind of what I like to do with undergraduates, whether it's in the classroom or in directed research, directed studies, honors theses, or like the ASH program that's funded research, is helping students, and through the centers in the Department of Communication, helping students understand how the sausage is made. You're a stats major, so you get to see literally how the numbers and that sausage is made, but most people hear these studies and don't really know what the process was for how we studied the content. Don't know that the popular trope in society that, well, if you show me one study that says this, I can show you 5 studies that say something else, right? Replicability is one of the hallmarks of good social science. And so teaching students, this is how we get to replicable results. It isn't just me looking at something and saying that's so. It's all of us reliably looking at something and consistently seeing something that leads it to be an accepted sort of, media theory or media effect, right? And so just getting undergraduates involved in that and sort of helping them understand in general how we do research, and so they can carry that into their life beyond, because most undergraduates won't go on to graduate school and won't end up conducting their own research, but having those skills, right? It should be able to be media literate, research literate, and then at the end of the day, if you're thinking of it from a practical standpoint, having those skills, statistical analysis, as you'll soon find out, right, in the real world, they're valuable skills for Fortune 500 companies. So undergraduate research is one of the most important things from an equity standpoint, a literacy standpoint, that I think a university can do.
Yeah, and one of the things you bring up is we have a little bit of different tools than like the biology, and we're looking at articles and we're saying, well, this is actually the analysis that's being done, and here are the statistical processes that we're going through, whether that's, people agreeing, which what we do in our lab, where it's seeing like, well, how many coders agree that this article has this type of characteristic. Can you talk a little bit about operationalization? Because I think that's something, especially when we talk about communicating social science research, communication research, people don't understand a lot about, just because we're used to something is like a gas or something is a solid, but we're not used to like, well, what is happy,
Yeah, so we think about things as manifest or latent content, right? That which we can readily see, and that which we have to have some level of interpretation. We can listen to a lecture in, say, communication research, verbal communication research, and hear verbal disfluencies. So I tell my students when I'm teaching research, if we're looking at manifest content, it's the number of times I say right, which apparently is a lot during my lectures, or you can count that. Latent content, as you well know, running statistics and reliability statistics is something that we have for our research lab, is something that we have to make a judgment on. One of the more famous examples of this is done by Gerbner and colleagues long back in the day, looking at violence in television and violence in media in general. Well, how do you define violence? Is violence something where you can see blood? Is violence something where someone hits someone else? How do we define that? How do we operationalize that? If a cartoon hits another cartoon, does that count as violence, right? And so these are a lot of the questions that communication scholars who study media have to grapple with. For example, when we're doing our project within the ASH lab, we have to decide whether or not something is stereotype confirming in its presentation, irrelevant to any stereotype for a group, or stereotype disconfirming, because the literature, the cognitive literature on stereotype formation, maintenance, and dissolution is quite clear that those are the three most important traits that we need to look for. Things that can reinforce stereotypes, things that are irrelevant to, and things that can disconfirm stereotypes. And so how we operationalize those, more often than not, has to do with the extant literature. So how have scholars looked at it in the past, right? But occasionally we venture into uncharted territories, and we have to kind of do a confirmatory or exploratory analysis once we get going. And so there is a little more judgment, and as a social scientist, we try to be as objective as possible. One of the ways that we do that when we're dealing with latent content is doing what we call inter-rater, intercoder reliability analysis, which is performing a statistical analysis on one variable of measurement, say, for example, the presence of a stereotype confirming presentation of a person of color. For any given presentation, we ask, say, 7, 8 coders in our lab, was that stereotype confirming? Then we run a reliability analysis using various statistics that can statistically show whether or not there was significant agreement above and beyond just chance agreement. And by doing that, we're hopefully trying to take away as much subjectivity and really make it as objective of a measure as you can when it comes to latent content. And so it's not just, and I think that's a popular myth that a lot of people have in the general public, is that when we make these sort of studies and design them and carry them out, that we're just kind of sitting back and casually looking at news and going, oh, that's wrong. Oh, that's liberal. Oh, that's conservative. But we have a number of people who aren't just sitting in a room and all judging the same thing at the same time. They're independently judging it, and then we're running statistics to verify they all saw the same thing beyond just the fact that they could flip a coin and see it, via agreement. So, yeah, there's a lot of work that needs to be done, as you well know, to make sure that we're doing things consistent with the scientific method.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, thanks for explaining that. So can you also just tell a bit more about broadly research in your field? Maybe go beyond content analysis, like what are other approaches that scholars take?
So there are 3 primary approaches within the social scientific approach within the field of communication. That's survey, and I think anybody who's ever been to the mall and been stopped by somebody with a clipboard knows the survey. If you've ever done extra credit for any class, it's almost always a survey through Qualtrics, through SurveyMonkey. It's right there in the name. You go and you fill out a bunch of questions. And those methods attempt to judge correlations, so they can see that something is linked to something else, but not necessarily see that one causes the other. And then obviously there's the quintessential experiment. But again, we don't manipulate genes in a lab or a petri dish. More often than not, in the mediated side of the communication field, mass comm, we may assign some people to read a story that features a criminal suspect, right, that's white. And we may assign another portion to read a story about a criminal suspect with no race featured, and then one feature with, say, an Asian, an African American, et cetera, et cetera. And then at the end, ask them all to recall what was the race of the criminal suspect. And that is part of an experiment to see, do we fill in gaps, even in a condition where we weren't presented with a race, just because it was a crime that person was Latinx or African American.
Okay, what is the research environment like in your field and in your lab specifically?
Well, in our lab, we're pretty informal. I don't like to be a top-down sort of, this is the way that we have to do it, because in communication, even though we have specific processes that there is this sort of top-down approach that we have to do, we get a lot of input from undergraduates. And that's because, by the time you get a Ph.D., and by the time you have got to the point where you've amassed a lab, sometimes you're not as hip as you think you are. And so sometimes undergraduates know about various ways of doing things that can help your lab. And so there's, among some, a myth that undergraduates aren't necessarily as suited to do research as, say, graduate students. And certainly there's additional training with graduate students. But from my experience, undergraduates do an amazing job at research. You can testify from your own examples of introducing new methodologies for running reliability scripts that if I did a quick poll, I would bet many graduate students don't know about. So undergraduates do amazing things. And when we run our lab, we keep an open dialogue because you never know when somebody has an easier method or a skill set from a different class set that isn't maybe necessarily communication that can aid your lab. So we run a fairly a rigorous but relaxed lab environment. In many other parts of the world of communication, it can be much more sort of rigorous as far as like you show up at this time, you meet during this time, we meet face to face, we discuss things and go over the code books, or we're going to do experiments in this sort of way. But I would say in general, most labs are kind of run very similar to how I run my lab with ASH and with other undergraduates not a part of ASH. It's relying on everybody's strengths instead of dictating that everybody do something a pre-prescribed way. Certainly we follow the scientific method, but everybody's going to have strengths that they can contribute to the project, and we try to allow people to shine in that way.
And what is the future plan for your lab right now? I know it's the third year.
Yeah, so we've got some time to grow, and we have a mentor joining us next year, Dr. Julius Riles in the Department of Communication, and he's a brilliant scholar, and I've known him for quite some time. We both went to graduate school together, so we will be like old times working on content analysis projects. One of the things that I have gathered data on my own is data that demonstrates that people who visit social identity-focused news sites actually increase racial esteem, right? So if you're a person of color and you tend to visit a social identity-focused news site catered to your group, it actually increases your racial esteem and perceptions of your group's importance within society. And so I'd like to center more on that. We're going to continue to do the content analysis because longitudinal content analysis is sort of the cornerstone of all good research. Matter of fact, Krippendorf and Neuendorf kind of make the case that before you go studying something as to its effects, you need to understand the content. So we need to continually look at the content to make sure we have a grasp on what the current status of news is. And socially shared news is a lot of what we see in our analysis, things that has Twitter and Instagram embedded in it. So we're going to continue to focus on that, but then examine the impacts of that and drill down more nuanced ways. And so really open it up to see what the ultimate impact is and consider more broadly other social identity focused groups beyond the Latinx and African American community. There's not been as much research as we would like in other marginalized communities, Native Americans, persons of Asian American descent, and then other marginalized communities beyond ethnicity and race is something that I think would be very important for us to sort of branch out and look at in the upcoming years.
Okay, so if you have an undergraduate who's looking to either start a project of their own or join an existing project, what ways can they get involved in research within the Department of Communication?
Gosh, that's a great question. Well, I like to take the mile-high approach where you're looking down. The easiest thing to do would be to, in the Department of Communication, contact me. I'm the Director of Undergraduate Research for the Department of Communication, the Director of Honor Studies. And so that's sort of my job, is to help facilitate individuals who are seeking this. I come into classrooms within the Department of Communication to talk about both things, both the honors programs, which is often tied to research, as you know, and just getting connected. Within the Department of Communication, we have a number of research-related centers. And so those are important ways and areas for undergraduates to get connected to our various focus areas, whether it's crisis and strategic communication, whether it's political communication, or whether it's media and diversity, which is sort of my focus area. We have a number of centers where undergraduates can do sort of traditional academic research by partnering with faculty, partnering on center-wide projects, or more applied sort of skill sets like we have within the Media and Diversity Center, an ongoing research program that isn't conducting surveys, experiments, or content analyses, but it is cobbling together the most validated, reliable scales that are used in surveys and experiments that we're trying to create sort of GitHub of, scales for academics who may want to do research in this area to say, here's an adaptation of, say, the modern racism scale by McConaughey that has been adapted for X, Y, and Z problems that McConaughey encountered. And we've got all the notes and various publications that have used it so that people can kind of come to the University of Missouri and see that's something we do well within the Department of Communication and reliably find those. So those are the first two areas. Beyond that, obviously, if you have individual projects, contact me and I will try to, and that's josey@missouri.edu, and I will try to partner you with a faculty member. A lot of us have individual students who are just doing research with us, and graduate students have very productive, as you can imagine, getting ready for the job market, research agendas that they often need undergraduates to help with that research. But certainly whether it's a project that you have created or have an idea for that you would just like faculty guidance on and would like to do a directed reading or directed research to do, those are all various options that we can do within the Department of Communication. There are a lot of undergraduates who do a lot of really good research in our department.
And you mentioned the importance earlier about grounding your operationalization in the literature and understanding that context so that you can apply that to your research and like what is relevant to the thing you're studying. What classes would students want to take that might introduce them to that? And also, if they're doing an independent project or just a project with another person, how do you recommend they approach getting into the literature?
Oh gosh, that really depends on what type of area and approach. Within the Department of Communication, we have scholars that are social scientific, such as myself, and Dr. Riles and Dr. B. Morowitz. And we have others that, take a more critical cultural perspective or a more qualitative perspective, doing more focus groups, interviews. And so there are a multitude of ways. One of the best ways is to take a research methods class within the Department of Communication. That's a way to get exposed to the various methodologies that are out there, and it will touch upon some of the sort of theoretical bases that you can do. There are also just content classes. We have survey classes that kind of give you a bird's eye view of what's going on in the field of communication. And certainly once you kind of know, for example, where you want to go within the Department of Communication, you can find a focus area that you can sort of apply. Within mass media, there are a number of great classes, whether it's gender and communication. Class that I'm teaching next semester, race in the mass media, that really drills down on a lot of the social cognitive theory of how, whether it's social learning or otherwise, how race gets done within mediated contexts. And even from there, I've had students do directed readings based upon a content upper division class and said, I'm really interested in this. Can I do a directed reading with you to learn more?
Okay, and then what is your advice for students who are of a different major, who are interested in your type of research, but may have a different theoretical training?
All are welcome. I know that there is a sort of stodgy approach to research by some, and I don't think all modern scholars are this way. I think most of, I'll say younger, as if I'm young, but younger scholars, say under 60, 70 years old, we'll throw everybody in there, which is everybody in our department. I think there was a notion that there is a correct way to go about like answering a question, which is that's all that we do, right? We answer questions. I like to think that every approach adds something, right? Quantitative social scientific research can answer a lot, but it can't answer everything. And that's why we have critical cultural and why we have qualitative approaches. And so whatever background someone has, whether it's a journalistic background, as you know, we have students within my lab right now that are J school students, and they're not quantitatively trained. We've had people that were part of religious studies that are doing it. So anyone who wants to learn and has an open mind can come, and they will bring their unique perspective to it. You shouldn't be intimidated by the methods because, as you know, even if you have no training within what we do, you can learn it pretty quickly. And I think it not only enhances your worldview of what research looks like, but you can, impart sort of your training to others within the lab. We take, as you know, a collaborative approach. And so everybody gets to learn from everybody. And so I think that if you're not from the Department of Communication, I have overseen honors theses for psychology. I've had students do directory readings with me that were digital production majors, sociology majors. And so we welcome all, and all are welcome. And so if any of what we do content-wise piques your interest, do not hesitate to reach out to me. And I will, if my research lab doesn't have what's going on in your mind is what is best, I will do my best to connect you with people who are doing amazing research that are welcoming undergrads in, so you can be matched with the right way to answer the questions given your unique situation.
Yeah, I would say I feel the same way. I think that the methods are kind of shared between different disciplines. It's just that different disciplines have different vocabularies for the same things. So, okay. What classes do you teach? I know you touched on that a little bit.
Boy, my catalog has recently shuffled a little bit. My primary class is Communication 2100, and that's Media, Communication, and Society. That class focuses almost 100% from start to finish on media literacy. So walking us through the media industries, right, the various media forms, and the effects of media based upon Potter's sort of model of media literacy, because we believe that all consumers, and I wish it were more broadly understood by everyone, not just people that get to take my class, all media consumers should have some degree of media literacy. So they know what goes into why they have the choices they have of media content and what impact those may have, and the choices that they can make to, make better habits for themselves, whether that's reducing the amount of content they consume or altering what content they consume, or sometimes what they vote for. That very much can impact the regulations, and who you vote for can impact the media landscape and ultimately the impact on you. So that's one of the classes I teach. I also teach new media and technology from time to time, which it focuses, obviously on Twitter, Facebook, social media, but also in the very beginning takes sort of a historical perspective of how we got to where we are, so we can understand that even though TikTok is new and TikTok is awesome and people love it, that it is just an iterative form of prior media forms that has changed slightly. And so many of the things that held true, say, for MySpace going way back, still hold true for TikTok to some degree. And so understanding that the cognitive aspects behind it can remain constant with tweaks depending on the cues that are present within the media. The last class that I teach predominantly is race in the media, and that's sort of my heart. So we go through like radio, movies, television, and news obviously at the end, and we look at how the portrayal of race in various media forms has changed over time, the impacts that it's had over time, and what is the work that needs to be done. And students tend to really like that class, and through all of these we put a great degree of emphasis on the research that's being done out there, and to explain not only like the experiment content analysis and sort of the results, but also the cognitive aspect behind it, so that we not only understand this is what the study did and this is what they found, but these are the cognitive or theoretical mechanisms that explain best what it is we're observing and what it is effect-wise we're seeing. So those are the three classes I primarily teach.
Okay. So what would you say to someone who's not sure whether they want to get involved in research or not? Like, what would you say are the benefits of research, and who would they be good for?
Gosh, everyone. Research is quite clear on this, whether it's from a perspective of first generation, second generation, third generation, everybody in your family has been to college. Everyone benefits from doing undergraduate research. It's getting involved. It's getting closer with faculty members and other students. It's producing original knowledge. It's getting a deeper understanding of the literature, the science, and the impacts and all of that. And so the research is clear that, just from a student learning perspective, everyone benefits. And faculty, we benefit too, right? Getting to interact with people, getting to run labs, producing research ourselves is part of it. Everyone benefits, and I would just say do it. And, the easiest way to find out if it's right for you in this season or moment of your life is to go and volunteer to be a part of someone's research team, right? Where you're not, part of a grade or part of a scholarship, and, try it for a semester, try it for a summer, and if you like it, then, explore more formal opportunities.
Okay. And what are some of the opportunities available right now in communication? Maybe some content analysis like ours, or interview research or surveys?
Well, I won't speak at this late in term for my colleagues within communication as far as what all they have specifically going on, because typically at this time of year, we would be sort of wrapping up a lot of things and not launching a lot new. But there certainly will be applications to become members of the Political Communication Institute, the Media and Diversity Center within the Department of Communication, and sort of the Crisis Center within the Department of Communication. So we'll be accepting applicants to become members of this. And if you become a member of it, you're connected with all the research. And most of the researchers are within the Department of Communication. But the beauty of it is our centers are also connected to researchers outside of the University of Missouri as well that are active in doing research, and sometimes big multi-university projects. So that would probably be one of the easier ways. Contacting me and finding out if any professors are doing summer research. Sometimes there are professors who do summer research at this time of year, but pretty well any time of year, just reaching out and seeing if any professor needs someone to jump onto a project. Certainly for our ASH project, we'll be taking applications for new students to join our ASH team for doing content analyses, and we're getting ready to launch an experiment as part of our ASH program. And so students who would want to join, and for that, that's a funded opportunity that will provide scholarship money. But there are, like I said, a lot of different ways. Even just talking to your academic advisor and say, I would like to do directed research or directed reading in preparation for directed research. Talking to your advisor, and they can help match you with the right person, the right opportunity from that perspective.
So if a student wants to reach out by email, say to a professor, what are the things that student might mention?
Well, one of the things that you would certainly want to mention is what experience do you have, what got you interested in it, why you think that faculty member would be a good person for you to partner with. Obviously, I would recommend to any undergraduate student, much like if you were applying for a scholarship, would want to do some preliminary research. And what I mean by that is go to their faculty page, find out what they do, who they're about, what type of approach. You certainly, if you want to do experimental research, don't want to reach out to a scholar whose primary focus area is focus groups, because they're two different things, and you're likely not to be put into a research experiment from that standpoint. Likewise, if you don't want to study content analysis, but you'd rather do focus groups, you don't want to contact me because I don't do a lot of focus group research. I can help point you in the right direction. And so certainly, if you want to do something in communication, reach out to joseyc@missouri.edu. That third time I've sent my email, because I will try my best to help match you to someone based upon your interest. I have taken conversations from students across campus who've reached out to me who are just doing exploratory, sort of like what opportunities are, much like what we're talking about now. And sometimes we meet, sometimes we Zoom, sometimes we just go back and forth via email, very sort of low stress. Don't feel like you're agreeing to or initiating anything, whether it's me or another faculty member whose research you look at and say, hey, that's pretty cool. I see Lissa B. Morowitz is doing virtual reality stuff. That seems cool, which it is. I think I might want to be a part of that. Certainly you could reach out to me, or you could reach out to Lissa herself. And as long as you're respectful, describe your background, they will get back to you and let you know what opportunities that they currently have going on. And most professors are always looking for enthusiastic undergraduates to do research with them.
Okay. Well, we've covered a lot of things. I was wondering, is there anything that I didn't ask you that you'd want to answer?
I think the biggest thing that students who may not be considering research but may watch this video or may be thinking about it that are watching this video should take home is that the skills that you learn, whether or not you go to graduate school for a master's or a Ph.D., whether or not you have any interest in publishing research or presenting research, the skills that you learn being part of a research team, being part of someone who's going to investigate something proactively, and not just reading the literature that's out there, but saying, I see a problem, I see something that needs to be explored further, and doing it. Just by doing that, you are developing the skill. Whether or not you actually get to the fruition and develop publishable results or any of that, just by doing that, you are developing the skill of initiative, and that initiative will serve you well for the rest of your life. And at being part of a team-based project or individual-based project that critically investigates, where you show all of the things that are required in research, whether or not, again, you go to graduate school, law school, whatever it is, those are the types of skills that Fortune 500 companies say again and again and again that they want. And I promise you, you will not look back in 20 years and say, you know what? I really regret doing that research when I was an undergrad, because every person I know that has done research with me stays in contact just about. And at undergrads, I get emails from students that have found me moving from Illinois to Missouri and, hey, Dr. Josey, I saw that you moved to Missouri, this, that, and the other. And so they explain to me usually in these emails, like, hey, I'm in law school, I'm a lawyer now, but that research prepared me for doing this, which got me to this, which led me to here. And so if for no other reason than self-interest, I think that undergrads should do research, right? Mm-hmm. Certainly faculty members love doing it, producing research, but for the skills that you will develop as part of that are something that you can pitch in a very powerful way, regardless of whatever field you go into.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for participating in the research profiles. It's been a pleasure to have you. I think that's all.
All right. Thank you.